Hi, I'm Venessa Giunta. I am an author and an editor and an all-around like to talk about things person and a little awkward sometimes. One of my favorite things to do is talk to authors, right? I love talking to authors about their process, their writing, their careers, their marketing, all those things. And I really love just sitting down and just talking about stuff. I mean, communication is my love language. So that's really what I had in mind. I really wanted a situation where I could just have a conversation with somebody. So, and a conversation and a cocktail is really all about us hanging out and drinking together and talking about the stuff. That's wrong. That last little thing is wrong because that's last month's. Hey everybody, that just totally threw me off. I had stuff to say and now I'm just like, whoa, that was so wrong. Joe Compton is not with us tonight because he is on his way home from Puerto Rico, where he was at Puerto Rico Comic-Con. And so we're kind of flying on our own. We've got the chapter goddess, Madeline Dale, who is being our tech goddess tonight. And we had no idea that hadn't been switched out. So sorry about that, but we'll talk about that in a second. So tonight I've got a super special guest. I mean, all my guests are super special, but this is a super special multiverse guest because the GoIndieNow network is currently partnering with Multiverse Convention, which is a science fiction fantasy horror fandom convention in Atlanta, October 20th through the 22nd this year. And I have the distinct privilege to be interviewing our guests of honor on this show. And tonight I would like you guys to welcome Milton J. Davis. Hi, Milton.
Hey, hey, how you doing?
Excellent. Excellent. I was a little thrown off, as you saw. So tonight I am drinking ginger snap cookie mead. That's what I'm drinking. Weird, right? But Milton's not drinking with us today.
Yeah, I wish I could join you, but I'm under the influence of drugs right now, so
that works too. I mean, no shade, man. So, all right. So I'm so excited that you're coming to Multiverse. I just can't even tell you. But I was wondering if you'd just let everybody know your origin story. Where did Milton J. Davis, the author, where did he come from?
Well, it started on a planet called Krypton, and
you nerd. You're going to fit in so well here.
Actually, I'm originally from Columbus, Georgia. I was actually born in North Carolina. My father was in the military. He was in the Marines, but I'm a Southwest Georgia boy. My parents are from there. That's where I grew up. That's where I was raised. That's where I still consider home, even though I've been in Atlanta for over 30 years. I still consider Columbus my home. And I guess, if you're talking about writing from a writing standpoint, I've always written off and on, but it was nothing that I paid a lot of attention to. It was things I wrote when I felt like it. Mm-hmm. When I was in the 5th grade, I wrote a play about what was it about? It was about the dangers of drug abuse. and I can't.
That's just say no generation.
Exactly. I can't even tell you why I wrote the play. I just wrote it. One of my teachers thought it was neat, so we ended up actually doing it. We actually got students together and we acted out the play for our PTA and did it like that, So, and after that, I really didn't write anything else. It was just something that I did that time. But the interesting thing about my science fiction journey was when I was in college, I had an English instructor named Anna Holloway. And the first essay I wrote in her class, she asked me to come to her office, and I was a chemistry major. I'm a chemist by trade. And she said, what are you doing majoring in chemistry? You should be writing. And I said, well, writers don't make any money. And I'm here today to confirm that. But me becoming a science fiction writer was all part of her diabolical plan. She was the person that actually introduced me to science fiction. Up to that point, the only thing I read was really history and current events and stuff like that. But she started bringing me books like Asimov and Heinlein and Arthur C. Clarke and people like that. And I'm reading these books more like they're assignments than they are actually, reading them for pleasure. And she would like, I think you could write something like that. So then I started writing little short stories, and she would read them and critique them and stuff like that. And that's basically how I became interested in writing science fiction. And then I kind of fell off again. After I finished college, I decided I'd give it a shot. So I took a Writer's Digest correspondence course on writing, and they put me one-on-one with an author. I took the little lessons. I would send them in, and the author would, the author would read them and critique them. And the assignment was I guess you can say the test was actually we had to enter the Writer's Digest contest. So I entered the contest. I got honorable mention. I got a little motivated then. I took another class. I took a class at Emory University because I wanted to make sure that the Writer's Digest class was legit. I hate to say that, but I wanted to make sure
it wasn't, poets of the world or whatever.
Exactly. So I took that class, and when I took that class, I said, hey, it looks like, I'm not learning anything new here. And that's when I started writing and started sending out stuff. And I went through the process of, the form rejections to the point where I was actually hearing from editors. They were like, hey, I like this story, but, not quite for us. You may want to send it to this person. And I went like that. And,
nice.
and then life got in the way, and I stopped writing for a while, for a long time. And when I turned 45, it was in 2005, I was asking, my kids were, up and they were grown, they were in college and stuff like that. And I said, well, what is it that you always wanted to do that you never did and was write and publish? And at the time, self-publishing was becoming pretty big at the time. I studied the market. I looked at what I wanted to write, which was basically science fiction and fantasy based on African diaspora culture and traditions. And I got the feeling from studying it that what I was writing was something that publishers weren't interested in at the time.
Sad, but true.
And I had been in my own business before. So I said, you know what? I want to write these stories a certain way. I want people to receive them a certain way. So I'm going to do this myself. I'm going to self-publish. And that's how it started. I started writing in 2005. I wrote for like 3 years until I'd written Meji and another novel series and stuff. And then I started publishing. And I've been doing it since then. It'll be 15 years next month, as a matter of fact. And
wow. So you're an early adopter of self-publishing, of indie publishing.
Yeah. I thought I'd seen it being done. The bookstore that first carried my books, they carried a lot of what they called back at the time urban fiction and street lit books. And they were, and those authors were all into self-publishing. And that's kind of where I got the bug from. And that's where I got the incentive to do it. Some of the first people to help me out were actually urban fiction and street lit authors that were showing me how to do my covers and all the kind of stuff like that. So I kind of started with that background, but just took it into science fiction and fantasy.
Yeah.
And was it 26 books, 11 anthologies, and and numerous short stories later, here we are.
I think one of the strengths of indie publishing itself is that voices that traditional publishing does not always embrace have a way to get their stuff out there. Because if there's something you want to write, there's absolutely somebody who wants to read it,
exactly.
And we've talked about on this show and many shows on the GoIndieNow network, how very sort of whitewashed publishing has been for a very long time, both white and straight washed kind of. And so I really feel like the rise of indie publishing has really helped diversify what's out there, because, you know, LGBTQ authors, Black authors, you know, and all these people, even differently abled, like you're seeing so many more stories from so many more people.
Mm-hmm.
And there's such a market for it. There's like a thirst for it.
It is, you know, I saw that. I mean, because I felt the same way. I felt like if I want to write these stories and tell these stories, there's probably somebody that wants to read it.
Mm-hmm.
And I also felt like, you know, my target audience was a Black audience, but I felt like a good story is a good story and people will read it. And over the years, that's what I discovered. I mean, I wasn't surprised by it.
Right.
I've been in business for a long time. And I know how people look at markets, and they're very narrow because they're looking at that profit margin, and they're jumping on any little thing that might cause them to lose money and just say, we can't do this, we can't do that. One of the biggest issues a lot of Black authors had initially was covers. Publishers were reluctant to put Black people on the covers. If they did, they either had us turning away or something, or they have some kind of abstract cover and stuff because they were like, you know, we might we don't want to alienate our audience. And I'm like, well, if your audience is not going to read the book because of the Black person on the front, why are they going to read the book if a Black person wrote it? You know, that kind of thing. And so, you know, but what we found out, I mean, and me and all the other authors that were doing this, is when we started doing these conventions and these cons, nobody was having an issue about our books. About the covers of the books or what we were writing about. And so a lot of the things that the mainstream publishers were saying were not acceptable, the readers weren't having those problems. Right. It was really the publishers who were having that problem. They were the ones having the problem. Yep. And over the years, it's been proven the same way. I mean, when you look at how things are now, and the books that are out there now, you know, when we were first coming out, we were fighting a battle, you know, to get this stuff done. And some people are still fighting those battles. Yeah. You know, we're still getting that pushback and within that mainstream system. But like you say, the independent avenue allows everyone to express themselves exactly the way they want to express themselves, and go to the audience directly the way they want to go to them. You know, for better or for worse. Right. Absolutely. But it's been working out.
Yeah, clearly. Clearly. So we've got some familiar faces out there. I saw Anita is out there with us, and Tiffany's here. Anita made a comment about your teacher being a very good teacher and that she has excellent taste in sci-fi. And Anita is also an early indie publishing adopter. She started in 2007. So y'all are of an indie generation.
Yeah, I know she probably went through. I remember I was in a forum. It was a science fiction and fantasy forum, and there was a bunch of us talking about writing. And I was really surprised that when I mentioned that I was going to self-publish, you would have thought I said, you know, I was going to, you know, set somebody's house on fire. There were people who attacked me about, you know, you're trying to skirt the system, and you know, you got to go through this process for you to be a real author, and all this.
And you're like, hell yeah, I'm trying to skirt the system. Yeah, that's exactly like the feature, not a bug.
and the worst one I got, and this was the one that really would irk most Black writers, was a guy said, well, why don't you write a story and make the white character the main character, and then make the Black character the sidekick, and then after it gets popular, then you can ask the publisher if you can make the Black character the main character.
Because that's never happened before. Like we've never had a white main character with a Black sidekick.
Exactly. You know, and I'm like, do you people, you know, are you listening to what you're saying? You know, that kind of stuff. But you know, that's the kind of mentality you were dealing with in the beginning. And you know, so you know, I mean, things have changed, but it was very interesting in the early years of doing this, and I know there's other authors that can back that up as well.
Yeah, I can't even imagine having to sit there and like read that. Just like,
well, my journey as a chemist has been similar to my journey as an author, because in many places when I was as a chemist, I was either the only Black chemist in the company, or I was the first. So when you're in that situation, you end up getting in some very uncomfortable conversations, and it's just part of the process. So when I got into writing, I was just surprised actually, because I'm like, these are science fiction people. You know, they read stories about monsters and fairies and everything like this, like that. And they actually have
black man can't possibly be weird. A black man can't possibly be weird.
Yeah, how can you have a problem with this? But at the same time, it was something that I kind of expected. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't anything that kind of was a culture shock or anything like that to me. And I'm like, okay, here we go. And you just deal with it. You know, that's how you work with it and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Anita says there was a lot of flack from the properly published crowd, just in general, even beyond not even factoring in the racism. You know, there was, and okay, y'all, I'm going to come clean. In my early years, because I've been professionally editing since 2008, and in my early years, I wouldn't say that I was one of those, no, you're doing a disservice to whatever. I was never one of those, but I was very much like, nobody's going to take you seriously. Nobody's going to take you seriously, until it hit kind of that peak where I was like, all right, now this is much more, you know, valid, not viable is the better word, than in the past. Once kind of distribution outlets started really, you know, taking indie seriously and stuff like that. And then it just came down. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
There's a story I told recently. And when it was before I started publishing, I just started writing and stuff. I was getting my stories together. And my son was a big R.A. Salvatore fan. Had all the Dritz books. So I decided that year I was going to get him the latest Dritz book. And R.A. Salvatore was in Atlanta. He was at the Decatur Library, and I was going to go there and get it signed for him. Mm-hmm. So I got the book and went there, sat in the audience, and R.A. came in. He was, you know, very nice and talking about his stuff. I told him about the fact that he was very patient with people, because somebody in the audience got up and basically told him what his next book should be about and how he should write it. And he was very calm and nice to the person. So when everything got done and we all lined up to get our book signed up, I had my son's book and I gave it to him, and we talked a little bit. And I told him, I said, well, you know, I'm actually writing myself. I'm working on writing, you know, sword and sorcery based on African culture. And he said, well, that sounds good. And I said, but I'm actually, he said, who you plan to submit it to? I said, well, I'm not going to submit. I'm going to self-publish. And he stopped and he looked up at me. He said, you know, and this is like what, 2005, 2006. Mm-hmm. He said, if you had told me this 5 years ago, mm-hmm. I would have told you not to do it.
Yeah.
He said, but now I think it's a good way for an author to go out there and get attention. And I said, well, I'm not doing it to get attention. I'm planning on doing it all the time. And then he like really looked at me. He said, well, good luck. You know, he said, you know, good luck with that. You know, so it was interesting that, you know, an author who was, you know, firmly established as a major publisher with major publishers was at that time, you know, kind of an advocate for us, and hey, you know, do it. It's a reason for it. And I think it still is now, you know, now we're doing things the way we're doing it now. I even think that people who are well established as mainstream publishers should consider it.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. I think being hybrid is the way to go if you can.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think something else I think is really interesting is that in the last probably 5 or 10 years, traditional publishing has been chasing indie publishing a little bit. I mean, have you noticed that as well?
Yeah, there's a lot of friends of mine that have been approached by major publishers because of what they're doing on the indie side. I've had a couple of publishers come to me and say, hey, you know, Milt, you know, if you got something you want to throw our way, you know, we'd be happy to take a look at it.
Like, and you're like, but why do I need you?
that's the question. You know, that's the thing about it. You know, you could say that the possibility of letting out a book that will be financially successful is higher than when you go to mainstream publisher. But when you look at what the average indie author makes and the average mainstream published author makes, there's not that big of a difference. Mm-hmm. So, you know, there's, you know, so it's, you know, it's a gray area right now, mm-hmm. you know, and I think you can be successful both ways. It just depends on how you approach it. And the real thing is that to know the industry, mm-hmm. the way you approach it, know what indie publishing requires, and at the same time know what mainstream publishing requires. Yes. Just be knowledgeable of what you're going to be dealing with in each situation, And so you make sure you take the full advantage of each of them. That's to me, that's the biggest thing. You just need to know what you're dealing with. In other words, know the game.
Yes.
And know how you need to play it in order to have a chance to being successful in either one of them.
Yes. I think another key component to that, though, is know what your definition of success is.
Like, that's true too.
You know, what is that? Is it that you want really wide distribution? You know, you just want people to read your book. How much money you make isn't as important to you as people hearing your message. Yeah. You know, do you want control over stuff? Because if you want control over stuff, you don't really want to go the traditional routes, right?
You know, and that's a big, that is true. I used to for about 7-8 years, I taught a seminar on self-publishing. And the first thing I would do is I would ask everybody, why are you doing this? Mm-hmm. And I would lay out the different reasons that people were doing it. And I would say, well, if this is the reason you're doing it, and that's the reason you're doing it, then maybe you want to do this.
Right, exactly.
But if this is what you want to do, then maybe you want to do that.
Yes.
And I had a few people get up and walk out because they were like, you know, I'm not ready for this indie life. This is not for me. And people would get upset. I said, no, they're being honest. You know, they're being honest. They you know, this is what they know. There's a certain way they want to do this, and this is not that way.
Yes.
I said, because it takes a lot of work, and unless you know willing to put the work in, you know, it's no reason to go after it and stuff.
Yeah, because if you want to see, if your goal, because a lot of writers come into it with the goal of seeing their book on an actual bookshelf in an actual bookstore. Yeah. And if that's really, really important to you, and that's as valid as anything else, it's as valid as any other definition of success, right? Mm-hmm. And if that's what you want, though, probably don't go indie, right? Probably don't do the indie route.
Yeah, that's tough. That's tough. I mean, I can say that somewhere in the world, somewhere, I don't know, except for in the Metro Atlanta where I have a relationship with those bookstores, my books are on somebody's shelves. I know that because I sell through distribution, and I move a certain amount of books through distribution every month. So I know somebody somewhere, they're buying these books and they're putting them on the shelf. But you know, I don't really have the marketing network to make it be as viable as a large company is, because I'm not getting that message in front of the readers like that will have them going into a Barnes and Nobles looking for my stuff, you know. And so, like, you're right, you know, if you're an indie author, you have to look at some of the other avenues. You have to look at festivals and conventions, and in my opinion, those are the places that you really want to go, because the relationship that you really want is that relationship between you and the reader.
Yes, because that's what this is all about. I mean, regardless of how you publish, your readers are the ones you want to talk to.
Yeah, so, exactly. And those are the people who are going to eventually go into those bookstores looking for your stuff.
That's right. And that's how your book's going to end up on the shelf, because they're going to ask.
Exactly.
Yeah. So Anita says it takes a lot of work to go the trad route too, just a different kind of work. Exactly.
Yeah, it does. It does.
I think there's a lot of overlap, but.
Yep, it does. It's you know, it's different things you have to do. Different, you know, having to build that relationship. You know, finding an agent, having a relationship with that agent, dealing with the editors. You know, and I've done it on a small scale because I've done it when I'm submitting like stories to anthologies and going through trade route and stuff like that. And that's how I learned that I'm not very good when it comes to working in those situations, because I'm so used to doing stuff on my own. Yeah. And then when the editor sends back and they want changes, I'm like, what the hell you mean you want me to change this?
My words are perfect.
It was fine the way it was, you know. And you know, so I'm cursing while I'm making the changes.
I mean, you still make most of the changes anyway, but you don't like it. Oh, that's hilarious. So I'm going to shift a little bit because I want to get into the conversation we almost had before the show started. So as happens often, we started chit-chatting before the show, and we started kind of talking a little bit about AI. So we're doing like a hard pivot in a different direction now, away from kind of publishing as a thing and into sort of tools and stuff. So what are your thoughts on the rise of artificial intelligence in the creative spheres?
This is a conversation that I haven't been avoiding for the past few months. And I've been avoiding it because of the fact that as a publisher, I'm finding myself in a situation where, you know, there are certain things that I do that specifically when it comes to art that will affect me as a publisher when I'm doing cover art and stuff like that.
Sure.
And like we were talking about before, I'm kind of like in the middle because when AI first came out, everybody was excited about it until somebody realized that somebody might lose a job behind it.
Yeah.
And then it's like everything took an about face. But at the same time, when it comes to art, I have artist friends that are on both sides of the fence. There are some of them that hate it. They want it to go away. They see it as something that's stealing creativity, and and it's going to cost people jobs, and they want it gone. But on the other hand, I have artist friends who are like, hey, this is a great tool. It helps cut down my turnaround time, especially when it comes to like developing concepts and stuff like that. And I've found ways to actually help me where it helps me helps me with my business, because now I can be more creative and more prolific by using the AI to do things that are tedious, the tedious parts of my process. And the same thing with writers, because one of the main arguments, when people started talking about the art side and we were discussing it, and all the artists are looking at all this writers say, you're next, they're coming for you next, and that kind of thing. And then, of course, people started talking about Chat GPT and started talking about things with that. And I'm the same way. I'm looking at that like, okay, this could be a threat.
Sure.
Depending on how you approach, how you handle your writing career. But at the same time, I can see where this could be somewhat of a benefit to me. Again, helping me do some of the tedious parts of writing that I don't necessarily like, and it would make that part go faster, which would in turn make me more prolific. And as we know, as authors, if we're looking to make money, the more we put out, the more money we make, So, and I'm still kind of like in the middle on it. I mentioned I actually recently lost a friend on Facebook because of that, because this is a person who was, adamantly against AI art. And I just happened to post a picture of a piece of artwork that an artist friend of mine had done, who actually used AI art to assist with the artwork. But this was a person who has always used artificial intelligence. They're a great artist, but they've always enhanced their images with AI software and stuff to do backgrounds and stuff like that. And so now, for them, Midjourney was just another tool, and that they incorporated into their work. And this is a person that has like murals on the side of buildings in New York, and has stuff in museums and stuff like that, and on display. And so they've always done that, So it's it's hard for me. And I even had an artist come to me and say, "Look, Milton, you're an independent publisher. You should be using AI because it will save you money. You won't have to pay all these artists and stuff like that." And I'm like, "Well, no, I'm not going to do that, because I like the variety of artwork. I've always really been into artwork. I grew up with two cousins who were like fantastic artists, and so I like being able to choose the art, and I like to choose different styles. I try to match a style based on the tone of the story I wrote. Because I'll finish a novel and I'll say, I think so and so would be great to do this cover art because their artwork matches this story tone, or I think this person would be great to do it. And I like having that choice. And when you look at it, and AI art is recognizable. You know it when you see it. It's a style in its own. And that style does not cover all the different expressions that I like to make with artwork when I'm combining them with my stories or my novels and stuff like that. So,
and I think nothing really. Anita says AI is here to stay, whether we like it or not, and I agree with that 100%. And she's been playing with Adobe's Firefly AI beta, created some faux impressionist paintings. Awesome, Anita.
That's people are using it. There are groups that are using it. There was one particular poet that I know who had in the past had a hard time commissioning people to do artwork for her. And she was like, look, I'm offering people money and I can't get these people to do artwork for me. And she just started using AI art to supplement that. And she's created some fantastic looking stuff.
Nice.
And now I know that I'm saying this, and there's going to be some people that are going to stop buying my books now. But but the truth of the matter is that it's here. Mm-hmm. It's not going anywhere. There seem to be some things now to restrict its reach to where it won't be, you know, like people say, farming other people's artwork to create artwork.
Yeah.
There are versions of it.
Definitely problematic.
Exactly. And there are versions of it now where if you're an artist, you can basically take your artwork mm-hmm. and put it into the system and then have it create artwork based on your artwork. Mm-hmm. I have a friend of mine who's a 3D artist. He does artwork for animation. And recently he made a statement about, and that's what he was doing. He took all the artwork that he had created over the years, put it in this database, and then was using the artificial intelligence to create art from his own database. Mm-hmm. Showing the difference between, you know, the stuff that he would normally do for his database and what it was coming out when it was coming out with the AI and stuff. So mm-hmm. so it's I think it's going to change. Actually, it's going to change how we do things.
Sure.
I actually started writing a short story recently, kind of based on something like that.
Oh, interesting.
About kind of projecting in the future, trying to see how an artist would make a living mm-hmm. in a world like that.
Yeah.
And so it's I won't say much more about it, but
right.
It's something. I mean, that's what we do as science fiction and fantasy authors. We look into the future. We project. Mm-hmm. You know, we say, okay, this technology is just at its infancy. How will this technology be used 10, 20, 30, 40, 100, 200 years from now? So that kind of thing. And how is it going to affect the everyday person? You know?
Yeah. And I think for me, I definitely have concerns about AI and, you know, like replacing artists, replacing writers. It's not going to happen right now, but if it keeps developing, there's absolutely a possibility of that happening.
That's
but
true.
At the same time, if we can incorporate it and use it as a tool, like you were saying earlier, because like we don't, you know, we use tools all the time. We use Grammarly or Pro Writing Aid. You know, we use stuff to help us enhance our stuff. And I know some people who are using the written AI like GPT, not GPI, GPT, who are using it as like an editor, you know, helping them to edit their work, which mm-hmm. I think is valid, right?
Yeah.
You know, and I've used Midjourney because I was working on a story and I wanted the atmosphere to help, you know, motivate me and inspire me. So I put in, like, I was working on a carnival, an eldritch horror carnival story. And so I put that in and it gave me a whole bunch of pictures that I was like, yeah, okay, I like that one. That one is the feel I want to go for. And I would just keep it open while I was writing my story. I didn't ultimately use it for anything else. I just used it for inspiration.
Yep. And that's the process. Whenever I work with an artist and I say, okay, I want you to do cover art for my book, the first thing they say is send me references.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I go around and I gather pictures of what I think are close to what I'm looking and trying to convey, and I send it to them. This gives you the option that says, well, they say send me references. You can create those references using this product.
Yeah.
You're not selling it. You're just basically giving them something that they can look at and see where they need to start in their creative process. Because I always tell them, I don't want this to look like my references. I want your style.
Yes.
You know, I'm bringing this to you because and sometimes there are some artists that want you to be very specific.
Yes.
And I hate being specific because I don't want to dampen their creativity when they start to draw this picture and stuff. So I try to give them the least amount of details as possible to get just enough so they can do the picture. That way I'll get their style, because that's what I really want. I want their style in that image and stuff.
I'm of the mind, I'm horrible for graphic artists because I'm like, this is kind of the vibe I'm going for, but I'm not good at the visuals, so you do your thing and I'll tell you what I like and what I don't. So having something like Midjourney is helpful because I can show them what I like on my own, right?
Yeah.
Put that back up, please, Maddie. So Anita says there are people that used AI to write story submissions, and that's causing all sorts of problems. It absolutely is.
It is. I've had a friend of mine who was editing an anthology recently, and she was complaining about that. And she said, like, it's obvious that these people are using AI to write these stories, and they're subpar stories. Those are the people that are always trying to get over. Always trying to.
There's always going to be scammers, right?
I've been worried about that. I've been thinking about that too, because I do anthologies and story collections from time to time, and me being a one-person show, I can't handle a bunch of submissions. And luckily, I haven't been flooded by any, because my anthologies are very specific. But I can see that being an issue. And I've even thought about myself. I said, well, would that put me in a situation where I might have to just kind of like do invitation only submissions, where I only tell certain authors they can submit, so to keep from having to deal with that kind of flood. But it's something I have to think about, because I don't want to have to be dealing with this deluge of mediocre stories.
Like Clark's World had to close their submissions because they were just flooded. And, it's not like it's not hard enough to get through to one of those, So, I mean, luckily right now, it's not so advanced that you can't recognize that it's AI written. Like you can if you read it, you can totally recognize it.
But it will evolve. And I mean, we're just at the cusp of it. I mean, I may be too nonchalant about it. Talk to me 2 years from now, maybe,
you might be eating your words, or you
may be one of the people with the pitchfork and the torch. I think so.
Yes. But I also think that there's something about stories at their core are about the human experience, and I don't know that an AI, at least a non-sentient AI, will ever be able to really properly convey that in a way that works for humans, if that makes sense.
And every author writes based on their own experiences. We try to say that we're objective, but usually when you get a chance to meet an author and get to know them, and you've read a lot of books by them, you can see them in their books. You can see why they write certain characters a certain way, because their basic traits about them end up being projected into their books. I tell people, I even see that in my own writing. I'm a very gregarious person. I have a lot of friends and stuff like that. And so when I write stories, very seldom are my characters solitary type characters. And it's a reflection of me, because I've never, I've always been in a situation where I've always had friends around. It's always been things like that. So I may have a main character, but that main character will never be by themselves. They always have a companion or a group of people with them, because that's how my life has been, and it reflects in my books. And I had a friend of mine who, when I really got to know him and got to know his life, I saw him in his books. The fact that his characters were always solitary, and they were always, and it was a reflection of him and his personality and how he grew up. So, and like you say, if you're you're trying to write from a AI standpoint, like I said, unless that AI is sentient, how do you?
And then we have bigger problems.
Then then we're like, then we're in a Terminator movie.
Yes,
we got a whole other stuff and a whole other group of things to worry about.
Yes, there's a whole different problem at that point.
Where's Sarah Connor when we need her?
Exactly. So, there's Robbie. Hi, Robbie. Robbie's he's also part of Multiverse. He's the assistant director to the Write Track, the writing.
Yeah, I know Rob.
You do?
Yeah.
Awesome. So speaking of covers, you have some beautiful cover art on some of your stuff. So we have some of your covers and stuff. So Maddie, you just want to toss our, okay, that's good. Playing the Odds, right?
Yeah.
So that is, yes, this is my favorite cover though, of the ones that I have. I love this cover, and this story just sounds so amazing. It's already on my TBR pile. So there's that. And then Terminus, Black Fantastic Tales from the ATL. That's also one that's going to be on my playlist. I mean, on my TBR. I haven't got it yet, but I just started because I want it. Because, you know, I'm also in Atlanta. So
well, I made a when I started writing my books and publishing, I made a promise. I said there's two things I want. I said I want Black people on the front of my books, and I want them to look good.
yes.
And so the fact that I think it helped that I grew up around a lot of artists, and one of the most significant things, and I'll talk about them, is it was early on I was part of this group called Black Superhero Forum.
Okay.
And it was a forum online on the computer, on the internet, and it was full of Black comic book artists. And a friend of mine told me about it, so I joined the group. I probably was like one of two or three writers that were part of the group. Everybody else was artists, and it was like a Wild West type forum. I mean, you know, people fighting and fussing and but at the same time collaborating and creating. And while I was there, I'm meeting these artists, and I'm like, man, this artist is good, and this artist is great. And I would call them off to the side somewhere. I say, hey, could I get you to, do this artwork? Can I commission you to do this and stuff like that? And most of the artists that I work with now are artists that I met on that forum before I started publishing. Yeah. And we've grown with each other. We started out at a certain level, and as they've grown, I've grown, and their particular styles. The ones I end up working with are the ones that I know that are very professional. They're good at turning around, and they do great art. And so most of the artists that you like, one of the artists that you saw there, the one that did Terminus, James Mason, is one of the artists that I met on that forum.
Other one.
And he's an Atlanta artist. And everything about Terminus is Atlanta. The authors are Atlanta. The stories take place in Atlanta. And so the cover artist had to be from Atlanta. So Mace is one of the artists that I've worked with for a long time. So I went to him to do the cover of that one. The other two artists, Sean Hill is an artist that I met through some friends of mine. And he's an amazing artist right now. Sean is actually doing artwork right now for Marvel and DC and stuff. And his line work is just amazing. And the Muscadine wine is by Elizabeth Leggett. And I've been following Elizabeth's work for a very long time. And her work just blows me away. I've seen her cover art on other books, and I'm like, one day I'm going to work with Elizabeth. And I said, I got to work with her. And when I came up with the idea for Muscadine wine, I automatically thought about her. I said, she has that style. I know she'll be able to bring to this cover art what I wanted. Because those stories are based on me growing up in Southwest Georgia. A few of them I've written over the years. The rest of them I sat down and wrote just for that book. And it's the first time I actually really tried to incorporate my own upbringing and where I grew up into stories that I was writing.
So you were doing the reflection with intent rather than by accident.
Exactly. I wanted these stories. I mean, some of them are based on our amalgamations of particular incidents during my life. Some of them are more general stories about just growing up in the South during certain time periods. And so, a matter of fact, the story Muscadine wine is actually loosely based on how my mother and father met.
Oh.
That story is kind of based on that. And when I finished it, I read it to my mom. Unfortunately, my father's passed away, but I read it to my mom because I knew it would be something that some of the things that was in there were things that I had learned from her, just talking to her and hanging out on my grandparents' farm and stuff like that. And so that book's like, it's in a way it's for a very specific audience. But at the same time, I've had people who've read it that aren't even from the South, and they've been able to relate to some of the stories. But it's really fun when I see people in my hometown read it, and they see me mention places that we grew up around, you know, oh, you put Uchi Creek in there. And I was like, you know, yeah, you did that. Like, you know, that's really fun to see them, to see how they react when they read stuff like that. You know, so.
That is fabulous. I love that. Yeah, that's one of my favorite things when I read is if I recognize the places. That's why I write most of my books set in Atlanta.
Yeah.
Because I like it's a selling point too when I'm at local cons.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I can say, hey, are you local? This is set here. Do you know this area? You know that place? That's where the first scene of this book is.
Yeah.
You know, so
we had that same reaction with Terminus because we did actually it was last year. We did our first State of Black Science Fiction panel at Georgia Tech. Lisa Yazik, you know, we approached her. She said, yeah, come on and do it. So last year we were celebrating the 10th anniversary of the State of Black Science Fiction presentation. And it just so happened we had come out with Terminus 2. And she had her students read the book. And she was talking about how her students were excited about it because they were reading this stuff like, hey, this took place at Little 5 Points. And, you know, I mean, what do you mean werewolves at Piedmont Park? You know, so,
yes.
So we had a really good turnout when we came to do the presentation. Students had a lot of questions and stuff like that. And that's the same, that's like you say, the same thing. I mean, we're always reading about stuff happening in New York and, you know, in Los Angeles and in Tokyo and stuff like that, you know, but, you know, we wanted to do something where we were having these extraterrestrial or paranormal incidents happening right here in Atlanta. So that's what makes the series so fun to do.
Yes. And I think it's hilarious you mentioned Little 5 Points because that is where the opening scene of that book is. It's in that sketchy parking lot that's, you know, kind of a little bit behind the plaza. That's exactly where
what you're talking about. There's a cool little acid jazz, a cool little shop over there that sells acid jazz, and I always go by there. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yes, it's like
in certain places you have to write stuff. You have to write something in Atlanta at Little 5 Points. I always wanted to write a chase scene through the airport. Where somebody's
that would be amazing. You know, they get their exercise, man. They get their steps.
Yeah, because you know you can just run straight from Concourse A to Concourse B and all that kind of stuff.
Yes, right, so, like right alongside the train.
Yeah, exactly. It's just certain places in Atlanta, you know, Stone Mountain, places like that. It's just certain, but it's also cool to like, you know, put some of the out of the way places that people who have been in that, because there's actually a little small park off of Cascade Road in the interior inside of Atlanta. And not a lot of people know about that part. I mean, and we actually, when we did an indie film a few years ago, and we did a lot of filming in that park.
Oh, nice.
But if you grew up in that part of Atlanta, you know about that park. It's almost like a little piece of wilderness in the middle of Atlanta and stuff. So to be able to incorporate stuff like that into from the city into these stories is like, it makes it really fun to write.
Yes, I agree. But the current book I'm working on, which is the first book of a new series in the same world, is set here again. But they go out to Stone Mountain. They also go up to Red Top Mountain Park.
Oh yeah.
So okay. Sorry guys, we're just getting all into the Atlanta scene and stuff. So what are you working on? You said you're working on that short story about AI, or that story about AI. What else are you working on currently? Like what's got your attention? What's got you going?
Well, I had certain things I always wanted to write. I had a list of stories I wanted to write. I wanted to write Sword and Soul, which is sword and sorcery based on African culture. I kind of saw my progress as my story writing was supposed to follow my history, basically. I was supposed to start writing stories on the African continent. And then my storytelling was supposed to follow from the African continent to the United States, and then write stories about, you know, African Americans, people of African descent in that area, and then eventually progress to contemporary times and then into the future. And I've kind of covered most of that, but I haven't really started doing all the future stuff. And that's where my interest in cyberpunk has come in lately. We just recently did a cyberpunk anthology. We're actually working on right now, you know, the space funk anthology. And
basically, what is cyberpunk versus cyberpunk? What's the difference?
Well, the whole funk series kind of got started at random. It started with the steampunk anthology, and it started from a conversation where we were talking about steampunk and the lack of representation in steampunk. And I was like, hey, look, guys, I'm a publisher. Let's make an anthology. And so everybody started saying, yeah, that's a good idea. And so we said, well, what are we going to call it? And then Maurice Broaddus was in on the conversation at the time. And he said, well, I wrote a story, a steampunk story, and I called it Steampunk. And we were like, cool. so that's what we called it.
Kind of snowballed.
Exactly. And so then we had the Diesel Funk anthology. And then we did the Spy Funk anthology. Each anthology was basically looking at particular genres where Black authors haven't really had a chance to kind of write and shine in and give them the opportunity to do it. And that's where the cyber funk anthology came from. Basically, just giving Black authors the opportunity to write in that genre and to write in it unrestricted, not, somebody telling them that if you're going to write a cyberpunk story, then you need to write it like this. My thing was like, just write it, write it. So you have, just like all of our funk anthologies, I tell people there are stories in there where the main characters happen to be Black, and there are stories there where the main characters have to be Black.
Yes.
And I'm always pleasantly surprised by the authors and the stories that they bring, because they just, it's almost like they feel like, okay, the restrictions are off. I can really, write this story, and I can tell the story exactly the way I want to, The first cyberpunk story just blew me away, because this guy had a robot in a undersea transportation device listening to Earth, Wind, and Fire. And when I read that first part, I was like, I don't care how the rest of this story goes. This story is going.
Because of course that's what you'd be listening to.
Exactly. So it's like some people take the title literally. Even like with Space Funk, I'm still reading the stories, but I've read most of them. And I won't say the author's name right now, but I had one author who basically took that whole concept of space funk literally. And the story that he told was just like amazing. I'm like, this is probably the kind of story some people would expect to get from this anthology. But at the same time, we have some people who have told some stories that are really deep and deal with some really deep issues. We have some stories that are just hilarious, So it's not like I'm not trying to set a certain tone for these books. I'm just trying to give people a range, of the different ways, because people used to always say, oh, white people don't see Black people in space. I'm like, well, that's because, we see ourselves in space. And this is an example of that. This is letting people just go on this subject and write these stories and stuff like that. So, so it's been fun to read. That's probably the main thing I'm working on right now. As far as personal novels, I'm actually working on another. I have a collection of stories called Visions. I let the first one out a few years ago, and I'm working on a second edition of that. And my Vision stories are basically the same way. It's just me writing stories, whatever I feel like writing. One takes place during the American Revolution. I have one that yes, you do.
Poor Tiffany's TBR pile is so big at this point.
Yep, I have one story that's kind of fun where I just tell you a little about. It's about a guy who hangs out with himself from another dimension.
It really breaks the time-space paradox.
Exactly.
He said, screw that.
And it's just, and that one's just a completely fun story. But then again, that's the same thing. There's some of the stories in there that are serious, some of them that are just irreverent, But those are probably the two. And there's one more. It's a Sword and Soul story that I've been teasing people with for a long time. It's called a Mercurian. It actually takes place. It's a part of history that people don't really know a lot about. When the Arabic nation made their sweep across North Africa, the first defeat that they suffered was when they went south on the Nile, and they ran into this kingdom called Mercuria. And Mercuria was a Christian kingdom, and it was basically made of Nubians. And that was the first defeat they ever suffered. And that part of Africa has always been known for their archers. Egypt called it Tasseti, which meant the land of the bow. And the Arab warriors ended up calling these people the eye smiters because they had the habit of shooting you in the eye with the arrows. And and that was one of the reasons why they turned the Arabs away the first invasion. And 10 years later they came back and they were defeated again. So they came up with this peace treaty called the Bach. And it actually ended up being one of the longest peace treaties in the world. It lasted for 700 years.
Wow.
And it's this kingdom, this thriving kingdom that a lot of people don't know a lot about, don't know a lot of the details. So I'm taking that background and creating a fantasy story within that background. And I've been wanting to do it for a long time. And I finally started writing the story, and I'm really having a good time with it. And it's a way of, telling a great story, but at the same time, exposing people to some history that they probably haven't heard a lot about.
Yeah, and paying some homage to, a group, a people who are not represented at all.
Exactly. Right? I mean, the Mercurians were, and this peace treaty wasn't really all just peaceful because the Mercurians were cut off from all of the Christian nations. And so they had a habit of always messing with they would always do things, and they was always bothering folks and stuff like that kind of thing like that. So it was kind of a testy relationship between the two and that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of stuff to write about in that makes it fun to write about.
Oh, that's going to be fun. I'm definitely going to keep an eye out on that. One of my favorite things is to read basically historical fantasy, which is what that essentially is, because I'm a history nerd. My undergrad is in history and political science. So I'm a total history nerd, but I'm a history nerd, not for, what happened when. I'm a history nerd for the stories of the people who lived through that.
That's it.
That is my history nerdiness. Yeah, so
that is it right there. I tell people, I say, if you don't really get into history, that's because you've been taught history by dates and events. Yes. You haven't been taught history through the lives of people.
That's right.
I remember this one book, and it was about the Mongols, and the book started off about this one particular king who had really pissed the Mongols off, and the Mongols made it their point to hunt this man down. And everywhere he went, the Mongols showed up. They're like, we're going to get you for what you did to us, because the Mongols insulted it. And they started off with that story, and automatically you're hooked. You're like, and then they go into the general things about the Mongols, but they always go back to individual people and the personalities and stuff like that. And to me, that's the best way to learn history, is to learn it through people and experiences, not just, and in 1749, so and so did this, that kind of stuff like that.
Yes, that's so boring. Who wants to read that?
Yeah, I mean, history is still my first love when it comes to reading. I'll sit down with a good history book any day, and I just got finished reading one a few weeks ago, and to me, it's just nothing like being able to read history and learn about experiences of other peoples and other cultures and stuff like that.
Yes. I always called history high story.
Well, I have a friend of mine that was a little more callous about that. She said history is the agreed upon lie.
And that is true. That is true also, because we can never really know, the feelings, the thoughts, the motivations of people who are long gone, who live who've lived in cultures that we don't really have any concept of.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so interesting, because to me, history is always new, because every so often somebody discovers something else. Yes. And then it goes back and changes everything else that you were thinking about, the whole concept of that part of the world or something like that, because now they've discovered another thing. Yeah. And then you have to go back and revise everything else based on that. And that's what makes it so interesting to me.
Yeah, just like a few years ago, they found that Viking warrior who was buried with all of these amazing weapons and a horse and all this stuff, found out it was a woman.
Exactly.
So they had to go back and look at all the other burials, like all the other ones that are warriors, and reassess the gender of the person who was there.
Yeah, and even like with me, a lot of the research I did in African culture when I was writing my books was in the 90s. And what's happening now is that a lot more people are doing more excavations and more archaeological research in Africa, and they're discovering more and more details about these cultures and stuff. There's my Changa Safari series I wrote based on Swahili culture and their relationship with Asia. And I wrote from a certain standpoint, but there's stuff that I've learned since I wrote that book over 10 years ago that I wish I had known then, because it would have given me more details and made the story even more interesting to being able to incorporate a lot of that stuff, So
yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I could talk to you for another half hour, but unfortunately, it is now our time. So thank you, Milton, so much for joining us. I really, really appreciate it. We have all your links down in the description. So y'all go check Milton's stuff out because it's amazing. I'm so looking forward to spending time with you at Multiverse this year. For those of you who don't know, Multiverse is, like I said earlier, a science fiction, fantasy, horror fandom convention here in Atlanta. It is October 20th through the 22nd. And I believe we have the link below. If not, we'll add it after the show. Thank you so much, Milton. I'm so grateful. Yay, awesome. All right, y'all, don't forget, it's always time to go indie now.